I'm Susan Hoskins. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and a member of Newtown Friends Meeting. I've also been a professional in the field of aging for the last 20 years. Today's episode in talking about aging issues is going to be about housing. My goal is to give you lots of information and to provide lots of questions to consider so that you can make an informed decision about housing for your later years. Remember that what makes sense today may not make sense 5 or 10 years from now, and you may need to make a different decision. There are two parts to this. One is an overview of your options, and the second is about aging in place. So first, I want to talk about some of the questions to consider when making a housing decision. First, obviously, is what are your financial resources? What's your budget? What can you afford to pay out on a monthly basis for housing? Second, what lifestyle do you want to have? Third, how's your health? Are you going to need health care services in the near or distant future? You might also look at your family health history to guess some of the things that might be coming down the pipe. What do you currently need help with, and what do you anticipate in the years ahead? Do you have family support? Do you have a partner, adult children, others who live nearby who can provide assistance? Are they likely to remain in the same place, or might they move away? And therefore you can't count on them? Are there factors in their lives that make it difficult for them to support you? Maybe they're parents of young children, or their job requires them to move frequently. And there's always the question of, do you want to be near them? Is that a good idea for you and for them? What about your friends? Can you rely on friends? Are they able to provide any assistance? Or are they also aging and need assistance themselves? Are they living nearby or at a distance? I know that one of the things that surprised me is the number of my friends who moved to a new community for various different reasons and are further away than they were when we were younger and raising children together. Is your faith community a source of support? How much support can you rely on them for, and for how long? Just think about the fact that it's a whole lot easier for a faith community to provide meals for a person when they come home from the hospital for a week than to provide meals because a person has memory loss and can't cook for themselves for 2, 3, 5, 8 years. So think about what's reasonable. Also, a faith community that has 10 active members can't provide the same level of support of a faith community that has 200 active members. Then think about, what are your activities? What kinds of things do you like to do? With whom? Are they still able to do this? So, for example, if you're somebody who played darts every Saturday night at the local pub, is that something that's really important to you and so you want to be near that local pub? Or also asking yourself, are the people that you used to play darts with still playing? Maybe they also are no longer driving at night. And so maybe it would be better to live in a community that has an active darts game that you don't need to drive to. Another question is, have you been a social person or a loner? I've seen so many families where they come to me and say, I think mom needs to move to a retirement community. But then when you ask some more questions and find out more, you realize that mom has been a widow for 20 years and has been perfectly happy living on her own, not going out except to the grocery store or an occasional get-together with somebody, but she's really basically a loner and pretty content with that. That person might not be happy in a community where it's required that you attend at least one meal a day with other people. Whereas someone else who's really social and out every day, doing things with friends, volunteering, interacting with people, may need to make sure that they have a way to continue that level of social activity into their later years. How important is your meeting in this? That may have been the center of your activities. Can you still get there and engage in the activities that you've done for so long? How much space do you really need? A lot of people end up with, 4 or 5 bedroom houses, but there's only 2 people living there. Is that really the amount of space that you need? How much can you condense down into, or simplify, I should say, into, and still have your needs met? Maybe one thing that's really important is that both you and your partner have a space where you can be away from your central living space. So a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom den, family room kind of arrangement is important so that you each have that separate space. What appeals to you most and least about moving into a residential community? Do you want a multi-age community, or do you want to live with a group of all aging adults who are your age and older? Many people appreciate their meeting community as a place where they get that multi-generational mix, even if they're living in an age-limited community. Next, is your current home well suited for your future needs? Does it have a lot of stairs, narrow hallways, poor lighting, no grab bars? What are some of the kinds of things that would make it very difficult for you to continue to live in that home if you had mobility problems? So, I knew someone who bought a narrow house that basically it had about 8 steps up to the front door, and then after you got into the home, another step up from the porch to the front door. The first floor was basically pull through, living room, dining room, kitchen, all open concept. And then there was a very narrow stairs up to the second floor, an even narrower stairway up to the third floor, which was the master bedroom. There was no bathroom on the first floor. That would be a very difficult home to age in place in. If you needed to have a hospital bed brought in for hospice, the only place to put it would be in your living room. Is that really a good idea? Another question to ask is, do you have history in this home or in this community? It might be much harder to leave a home that was your grandmother's, or which is on land that was your great-great-great-grandfather's, and it's been in the family for over 200 years. It might be much harder to leave that than a home you've only lived in for 3 or 4 years or rented. Do you have pets or dependent adult children that you need to consider? Might your decision change if your circumstances changed through death, divorce, a move, a healthcare change? Be prepared for the possibility that you might make a different decision. I know one person who was an adamant advocate for aging in place, and that worked really well for her until she was in her mid-80s. Her husband died, and suddenly that home that they'd lived in for so long was way too much for her to take care of. She was lonely and ended up moving to a different state to be near her son, which was a much better choice for her. Another question is, do you want to make a single move, or are you open to moving more than once? So you might decide now to move out of that 5-bedroom house into a 2-bedroom apartment or home that is easier to take care of, but knowing that down the road, if you needed more assistance, you might need to move again into an assisted living or skilled nursing care community. So those are some of the kinds of things that I think are worth considering, worth discussing with your partner, with your family, um, when you're thinking about what would be the right next step in housing for you. Now I want to talk about a glossary, a group of terms that we use to describe different kinds of housing, um, so that you're familiar with those when you run into them in exploring different housing options. So aging in place is when you own your own home, or you're living with family, or you're renting a home. It's good if you're relatively independent, but you may need to add paid services such as home health care, adult daycare, transportation, housekeeping, as you need those services, because you can't do all of those things for yourself any longer. It may also require some home modifications, to make the home more user-friendly, using some of those principles of what we call universal design, which I'll talk about again later. A life care community, formerly known as a CCRC, or Continuing Care Retirement Community. These communities provide all 3 levels of care on a single campus. That is independent living, assisted living or personal care, and skilled nursing. Another option is co-housing. Co-housing is where a small group of people decide to share a home. It may be part of a co-housing community with several units clustered around a central community room, so that 3 or 4 people share a unit in a community with other similar groupings. House sharing, inviting someone to live in your home, such as a student or a person struggling with homelessness. Your agreement may include services in exchange for housing. It could also include multi-generational family living. I know some people who are living in a 3-generational family, but they have separate sections of the home for the grandparents from the active younger children in the family. But they share a kitchen. Sometimes there are even 2 kitchens in a single family dwelling. There are also accessory dwelling units. These are a carriage house, a converted garage, or a small housing unit which is built on your property as a freestanding separate unit. You'd have to check with your local zoning to see what's allowed and what isn't on that. Retirement living or age-restricted housing. This may be rental or owned, could be townhomes, cottages, apartments, condominiums. It's often a cluster of townhomes around a central pool, golf course, community building. And one thing that's important to remember here is that there are no services provided, so don't expect that retirement community to provide transportation or care coordination services beyond the pool, or there might be residents that decide to have a bridge game once a week in that community room, something like that. The next one is the village concept. This links neighbors to support each other in their aging in place. It's often focused on volunteer-led activities and volunteer visitors. Sometimes there's a staff coordinator or navigator who links members to various needed services for an additional fee. These are often organized around a geographic area or an existing retirement community. A NORC, a naturally occurring retirement community. These are generally found in high-density housing areas where a significant number of residents have aged in place, so services are brought into the building. It was first started in Co-op City in New York and pioneered by many Jewish communities, which have had housing communities for aging adults, and then they found that so many of them had additional needs like transportation, food delivery, and so on, that they brought those services to the people rather than people to the service. And last, I'll talk about supportive housing. This is a combination of housing and social services intended as a cost-effective way to help people live in more stable, productive lives. It started with the homeless, mental health, substance use, and now is also being seen in aging adult housing. There's often a service navigator on site, at least during the day, during the week. Sometimes there is an additional fee for this, or it's a part of the services offered in that community. Now I want to talk about levels of care, because not everybody needs skilled nursing services. First, we're talking about independent living. This is where you own your own home, or you downsize, but you're still living in the community and managing most things for yourself. Retirement communities are designed for senior living. Some include meals, a maintenance fee, activities, other amenities, housekeeping, and usually the building and grounds care is included. These are usually sold on the market for market rate rentals. There's also sometimes a fee depending on what services are included. Types of housing include townhomes, apartments, condos, and cottages, as we said in the last section. When you're living in independent living, you can also bring in services like home health care, and we will talk about that more in the second half when we talk about aging in place. But the next level of care community is an assisted living or personal care home. These are homes that are designed with each person having their own apartment. You have some limited cooking facilities, your own bathroom, sometimes your own sitting room as well as bedroom. These communities include meals, they include some activities. So the idea was that a recognition that some people didn't want to be living in their own homes anymore, needed more help, and wanted to live in community. I think they addressed loneliness a lot. So people who live in assisted living communities generally need assistance with a couple of different activities of daily living. This may include meal preparation, medication reminders, dressing, bathing, things like that. The costs in these communities vary according to the level of your need. There's 24-hour coverage, and as I said, meals and activities are included. Assisted living and personal care communities are regulated by the state. I will note that some states allow for care homes with less staff and regulation, although this is not true in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Memory care. So some people, when they begin to show signs of advanced dementia, also begin to wander. They need a higher level of care. They have more trouble with more activities of daily living, but they may also be at risk for wandering away. And so memory care is often provided in a locked or secure unit. Often these are part of an assisted living community, but it's a separate unit within that community. So because the services, they have more nursing service, the staff to resident ratio is higher, the fees for that level of care is also higher. The highest level of care then is skilled nursing, formerly known as nursing homes. These are for people who need 24-hour medical care for serious physical, mental, or cognitive conditions. These are also licensed and regulated by the state. You can find ratings for them on Medicare.gov and on your state health website. As I mentioned before, life care communities provide all three levels of care. There's often a large entry fee. The monthly fees may vary by the level of care you need. And the fees, of course, for this level, this kind of care is usually much higher than the others because it includes meals, health care, activities. Some are called all-inclusive life care plans and others are a la carte, so you pay a different level depending on the level of care you're using. I also want to mention subsidized and affordable housing, which are for income qualifying people. So if you're really low income, you may qualify to live in subsidized housing. Generally, people pay about 30% of their income to live in these, and there's a long waiting list because the demand, of course, is much higher than the availability. But for really low income people, that is a very viable option. And like many of the other communities for older adults, they provide apartments. Some of them have meal options that you can opt into. Some of them have care coordinators. More and more we're seeing care coordinators or care navigators serving these communities because there are so many aging people who need an array of services. The next thing here is a graphic which just illustrates that the more need you have, the more care you receive, the more it's going to cost. None of these things are inexpensive, but you need to plan for and expect that more care means a higher fee, and there isn't really a good way to avoid that. I also wanted to talk some about how do you evaluate a community. So if you're going and you're visiting assisted living communities for yourself or someone in the family, or life care communities, any one of these options, there's a number of questions that you should be asking yourself. It's often helpful, let me put in a plug here too, it's often helpful to use a geriatric care manager to help you navigate this process because they know the facilities that are available in the area that you're looking. They know the reputations of those organizations. They also do a very thorough evaluation of what your needs and your resources are so that they can match you with the best community for your needs. I do think it's important to, if you get assistance in navigating this, that you are wary of some of the free services because there's always a way that they're getting paid. Oftentimes that is a fee from the community that you chose. So it's good, or that they guided you to. So it's good for you to ask, how's the service being paid for? What are the credentials of the person who is guiding you? And do they have a preferred provider list where they're getting a higher fee for steering you towards one community over another? The other thing I want to say about a geriatric care manager is that they would continue to work with you as long as you wanted. So you might be looking at housing now, but then a couple years down the road be looking at transportation options or looking at meal delivery plans and things like that. And the geriatric care manager will help you with each of those decisions and help guide your family through that, through these decisions. I highly recommend that if your family members don't live nearby. The decision about housing is closely tied to community. As we age, we will likely rely more on others. Can you envision yourself as a member of the community you're investigating? What do people do with their day? Do they spend it alone in their apartment watching television? Or do they come out to community areas and get involved in activities, volunteering, socially interacting with other people? And which of those things suits you best? How welcoming are the residents to new people at activities, meals, one-on-one? Do you walk into the dining room and somebody says, "Oh, you can't sit there, that chair is reserved"? Or do they welcome you and say, "Oh, come sit with us, tell us about yourself"? Are there activities that you want to engage in? Can you see yourself here? Does the community rely on staff or peers for support and activities? That's a really big difference. A lot of communities that kind of expect residents will move in thinking, oh, well, the staff ought to do this and this and this. And the staff say, this is an independent living community. It's really up to the residents to organize these activities. What's the decision-making process? Are residents included in deciding what activities will be offered or what the rules will be about something? Are new ideas welcome? Is there a meaningful resident council? Would you be able to live here comfortably if you did not drive? What are the transportation options? I saw so many age-restricted housing senior communities growing up in central New Jersey, popping up in central New Jersey in the land that used to be farmland. It may be a beautiful room in a beautiful building with chandeliers and everything, but you're also still in the middle of a cornfield. And that may not work really well if you want to be connected outside that building, outside of that community. That's one of the reasons that in age-friendly communities, we talk about walkable communities and having residences in the center of town so that you can walk to a grocery store, walk to a movie, walk to a park. It's also important to note that most communities do not provide transportation, so it's good to investigate what the local transportation options are. Is there a paratransit or a senior transit bus that takes people shopping, or can take you to a hairdresser if you want to go? Or will you rely on Lyft and Uber and similar transportation services? What is the cost of those to you? How fluent are you in reserving those things using a computer application? Would you still want to live in this community if your partner became ill, disabled, or passed away? Do you want to make a single decision for your remaining years, or would you make different decisions as you go along, depending on your needs and options? What if you and your partner need different levels of care? Do you both have to move to assisted living? What kinds of arrangements? How does the community facilitate that difference in need? What are the community rules and policies? Do you know anyone who lives here? Are they happy here? Do they call it home? Are staff happy? Do they work here a long time? Is it the only place that they work? What do you observe about interactions between staff and residents? One of the things I used to do when I visited assisted living communities and I was being shown around by the marketing director was to listen to that person's interactions with residents in the hallways and in the elevator. It's very different if the person just focused her attention on me versus whether she turned and said, oh, Mary, I heard you were sick yesterday. Are you feeling better today? I was going to stop in on you later this afternoon. Then you know that all of the staff, not just the direct care staff, know the residents and care about them. How do the fees work? Are upfront fees returnable? And what exactly is covered? I had so many families, particularly in the early years of assisted living, who said, okay, well, that's going to cost us $5,000 a month. I think we can swing that. And then they got the first bills, and it was several $100s higher because there was an add-on fee for laundry and an add-on fee for medication and an add-on fee for this and that and the other, things that they had not been expecting. If there are levels of care, are they all highly quality rated? Often when you go on a tour of one of these places, it's like going on a college tour and you get to see the student center and the library and all these really spiffy places. Same thing is true in life care communities. They show you the independent living. Very few of them show you what things look like in assisted living or personal care or skilled nursing. And I think it's important to look into what residents say about that level of care should you need it, as well as all of the perks that go with the independent living. Is the whole community well maintained and safe? Make sure you visit to check out the social scene, the food, the activities, the apartment layout on different days at different times. Go on a weekend. Go at lunchtime, go at dinner time. Go at breakfast time. Some of the greatest social things I've seen in some of these communities is happening over communal breakfasts. There are lists and lists of these kind of things, but that will give you several questions to get started with. I want to leave you with some queries for discussion, and they are: what factors consider most highly in your decision about where you will live? What have you heard today that has influenced your thinking? And what do we all need to do now to ensure that the options we want will be available when we need them? I've also given you a list of some resources that will get you started on this journey. You can also search on the computer for many of the terms that I've used and get a lot more information. Again, just be careful about whether you're using .gov, which are government sites, .org, which are nonprofit, or .com, which are commercial and often lead you into more of an advertising zone. I hope your takeaway is that there are many options and that this is an individual decision based on many factors. Thank you.